Hello and welcome to this video loosely documenting my piece for violin and triggered sound files. Fields of Darkness and Light was composed 2009-2010. It is 10.5 minutes long and is for violin and fixed medium. Let's jump in immediately and address the question fixed medium. This used to be reel-to-reel tape and was in the 60s and 70s just one kind of tape piece. This defines the medium, but not the aesthetic or style. It says nothing about what's on the tape. Therefore, when we moved from tape to digital audio tape, mini disc, compact disc, and eventually spacebar on a laptop to play a 10-minute sound file, our whatever music resided on a fixed medium. Similarly, in the 70s and 80s, there was a clear divide between those doing music concrete, normally a single work that ran on a fixed medium from start to finish, and those mixing esoteric sounds or synthesis live with instruments. For those composers working with instruments, the biggest problem with adding these additional non-instrumental sounds was synchronization. Some used multiple tapes, eventually samples triggered by keyboards. Pierre Boulez pioneered the real-time transformation of live sound through delays, live sampling, and triggered playback of samples from computer. It's a fascinating history of struggle, mainly against equipment and competing aesthetic stances. If for one moment your solo violin player isn't in charge of the computer, then the computer is dictating the music, and for some, it ain't music. This was a strong aesthetic stance to take, and there are so many examples where players can work with a fixed electronic part in such a way as to make players and fixed media seem like one unit. The two examples that spring to mind for me are Karlheinz Stockhausen and Contactor and Dennis Smalley's piano nets, particularly the second movement. Why is this introduction important for fields? I had written but a couple of instrument plus pieces, one instrument with essentially a backing track. I wanted to make fields as flexible as I could without losing the ability to work with sound in a manner that I'd been trained and definitely gotten used to. We're lucky to have people like Dara Morgan around who are contemporary violinists that challenge composers to write for them. He asked for a piece, and this was therefore my challenge. The process was like this. Score some fields, essentially block chords, rotations and transpositions. I had tinkered with this idea before in a fixed media acousmatic work called Rococo Variations. Tchaikovsky won't mind, and it doesn't get me as many extra plays. In fact, playing a clip from this piece is important as it exposes a technique I use to this day. I like to use one sound to manipulate another. It's a kind of spectral shaping, almost like vocoding, where the sibilance of the voice, say, is separated from the vowel pitches and replicated using noise and tone. Here I'm taking a sequenced set of synthesized chord drones and shaping them with articulated samples. If the drones and the articulation samples both have sufficient content and variation, the voice works well as a test against something like a sawtooth waveform, you get a hybrid shaped in time through dynamics and also frequency through filtering. The fields chords were therefore similar and would probably be played by some synth or homemade violin sampler. From these chords would come transpositions, but these were rarely used as I already had enough notes. Also, some simple phrases, double stops and textures for Dara to record. I did a pre-recording session with him prior to making the work. This was useful as I could get him to play very short phrases that would appear before, near, after it played live, giving the impression that somehow the computer knew or sampled him live. It's all faked, I'm afraid. The basic principle for moving between fields was just through common notes in chords. There was plenty of room for manoeuvre. Let's look at a few files and see if we can figure some of the processes used. Here is a almost complete backup of the files and folders of what it took to create fields. So it says here it's 12.9 gigabytes. And in here we have some of our original samples from Dara. So we can have a quick look at these. So these are clearly my original ideas. You hear quite a lot of this back in the piece. So quite a lot of just small experimental snippets. 11, E natural, F natural. That's in the piece. 11, note selection. So notes drawn from the chord, played in any sort of random way. I mean, I'm going to randomize it even more. 11, run up. That's back in the piece, slightly altered. So there's some of the original sounds. Development files. Granular drones. Number 1, granular drone. First, I should say that I also recorded myself playing a, let's see, a sampler. Oh, where's that? Well, that's an example of Dara's notes being further developed, and chord number 1, spread. Important to get some stereo in there, and it's gone through all of the chords. And of course, when I was doing these developments, I didn't do them all one by one by hand. Let's see if we can open this with, let's find an app quickly. Oh, WordPad, that'll do. I was using C Sound. So what was this doing? This was defining presets. This is doing convolution. And I was also using, so that was the C Sound that was running, and this was the text file that I ran. So you convert this to an executable text file and just run it. And it looks for all the files that are in a folder with a .wav extension, and it produces all the chords. In fact, this is doing it by hand, but you set this up and you edit as necessary. Edit 18, chord 19, and it's running C Sound, and again it's doing convolution. This file is coming out con for blip and blur. So it's doing some phase vocoding, it's doing some articulation, and it's doing some convolution. And you set that going, you pop off for a quick coffee, and you come back and see what the results are. Let's have another, just flick through some files. Chord files. 1A. One B. So, a bunch of chord files with octaves. So the longer notes, the lower notes are lasting longer. The same for all of those. Chord files developed. Number 1, all con. So there's clearly some articulation here. 1 semitones. We know what that's doing. What's this one called? 1 octave 3 A oct bouncy pad. Who knows? Interesting. Didn't make it into the piece. That's my construction folder, how I put it together. Dara samples, development files. Let's have a look. We looked at granular tones, held notes, 1 interval hold. That made it into the piece. So here we are. However I made that, that's gone into the piece. Again, some sort of sustaining method. I don't think there's anything in there that's worth playing. Violin regular pulse. Some of that went into the piece. 1 regular filt. No. Not a lot of that went into the piece. 10 plucked. So as you can see, most of the experiments that I liked to do on one chord, I then was forced to do for 12 others. Low intervalize. There's my sub. That went in. Note picking. So this is just glissing from one note in the chord to the next. It's quite neat. Pitch shift. Scrolls. So glissing to and away. Some of this is quite good. I think I'll have to make another violin piece. Some of these glisses made it into the piece. 1A fizzle. Okay, that didn't go, but it's useful to show you how I'm using clearly onomatopoeia to define my sounds. I think we've had enough time here on this. Fields, recording, hits, 1A conv clicks. not great. When I've written Geiger, it sounds like a Geiger counter, maybe. Again, it's a chord and it's articulated. Pitts notes. Oh, this is me building up a little sampler. Spread chord files. I think we've been here already. Yes, we have. Vib notes. Again, I'm building up a sampler to make drones. So where's sound file listing? So this is an example of the files, and then I would go through these, print them off and mark them up. The ones I've used, the ones I think might be really useful. There's quite a lot of files there. Let's look at a mix of manipulated files that went to create the 100 individual cues that were triggered live. Okay, here's a Nuendo file, Cubase file, for fields of darkness and light, with the constituent files set out in time. So hopefully that's the whole of it, with spaces in between the sections. And I've kind of identified here, let's see if I can bring that up a little bit. No, I've got some markers here. It says first, coda, third, interjections, second, and interjections 2. Let's just go right from the very beginning. Only a very few tracks of stereo, because there's going to be a violin on top of this, and quite a few of the files are also quite strongly pitched, and as you can see here, very few just a reverb effect. So let's have a look. This should be reminiscent of the opening. So that's the opening sequence, and this file here, this send is down. This send should have been up. I don't know why it was down in this one. So that at the end of this we'd got at least some reverb, maybe a larger reverb than that. This is a file from 2011. And I'm just trying to locate a few additional files, so it's from a while ago. And then what I've obviously done here is these are individually played on key presses. So I would have first of all muted these and recorded that as a big file, and then used those as additional files that play on top live from PD or pure data. Again, this one here would have been a newly played file in PD. So here's some of that process that's been saved down. Where are we at here? That's one of those files that I got Dara to record just here, that he also plays just a few moments earlier or later, I can't remember, So it sounds like there's some sort of effect, but really it's a false playback of his original file of what he's playing on stage. So here we've got 11 comb play. So that is a series of comb filters tuned to notes from chord number 11. And this is 11 D sharp, E natural, gran with gran pitch, reson and blipper. Wow, what a mouthful. But it's obviously D sharp and E natural. There's some granulation, and it's pitched using resonant filters, and then it's articulated. And I like, if it's a series of blips, I'll say it's been done with a blipper. Let's see. You can definitely hear the resonant filter obviously there. That'll be one of the triggered sound files that comes in as Dara plays a note. What else have we got here? Let's look at this one here. 14 interval hold. With 1A low intervalize. Let's just listen to that on its own. That's a nice sub. I don't know why, with all my future pieces, I always like to make my sound files afresh. That's a sub file I'd use again. It's got some really nice bass to it. So together with all of them. And then I know that this bunch of files, although I'm recording them here, they're going to have to lead with this. So in theory, they'll be here. This one will be here, this one will be here, this one will be here, this one will be here. They will be back a little bit, but because I'm recording them out separately and I'm going to interleave them live, I'm going to record them out in chunks. This one here, 4 B flat, A flat, grand pitch reson, another similar technique to previously. 10 mix, BB conv 1A. Again, quite strongly pitched. Let's see if we can find, if we go to the interjections, we can have a look at things that are slightly more gesture based. And if I can find the end, the end is interesting. Where's the coda? So this has to join directly onto this, I think. So at the end, on the last page of the score, you see some triggered notes that come with violin pitches. So this last note here triggers this.
and then these coming on top of this file at some point. I think that's enough of a quick guided tour around some of the files. So what's different from normal composition is I'm thinking about making sections, but I'm also thinking how those sections would be joined together, but then they have to be mixed apart, and that's quite tricky. Okay, as I've had to just set a few things up to get PD to communicate with OBS, I'm not going to go into any detail about that, but once I've made a patch here in PD. There was a max patch that looked a little better, but this is what you get to play the piece. And really what you need for this is to be able to open this patch, to turn the DAC on, so that you see that here, to lift the main EA volume, test the microphone if the mic is coming in from the live violin, load a list of the files. So that tells you what files to play, how long they are, a little bit of a fade in, and then this, the kill gesture, says kill file number 1. So that would be this one, and it would give you a 2000 ramp out milliseconds. And that's all the files it takes to play the piece. And there's 100 spacebar pushes. So the spacebar comes in where does the spacebar come? Here, key, select 32. And that gives us a counter, and there's our cue number. So we've opened up the patch, we've loaded up the main EA volume, reset it to 0, and bang, and then spacebar. So with that first spacebar push, there's enough in that long drone to get us, or to get the violin through what he or she needs to play, so that when you trigger the next, there are a few shorter triggers that come over the top. I'll do that now. And then when you get to the next phrase, the two overlap. So I made the phrase longer than it should be to give the violinist more than enough room to be as flexible as they want. So the idea behind this is that the spacebar pusher, for want of a better name, gets to listen to, interact, and almost play the spacebar in a musical way. And the music hopefully adds to that feeling. So now doing it properly, reset again to 0, the second note, third note, and then he's coming for the trems. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3, and then next phrase.
Thank you for watching this video about my violin and electronics piece, Fields of Darkness and Light.